Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today to gain insights and strategies into supporting the well-being of your employees who are working parents or caregivers. You are likely aware of the U.S. Surgeon General's recent advisory, where he calls attention to the importance of parental stress, mental health, and well-being, stressors that are unique to parenting, and bidirectional relationship between parental mental health and child outcomes. Today, we are going to share with you 4 strategies that you can integrate into your well-being offerings that can help reduce the daily pressures on parents, foster a more resilient workforce, and provide the support needed for everyone to thrive. I'm Jamie Gassman, Vice President of Marketing here at R3, and I will be your host today. Joining me in this discussion is Dr. Tyler Arvig, our Vice President, Associate Chief Clinical Officer here at R3. Welcome, Dr. Arvig.
Thank you, Jamie, and thanks everyone for joining us. We're really excited to dig into this topic and dig into what the Surgeon General warning means for all of us in the workplace.
Awesome. Let's get started talking about the Surgeon General's advisory in particular. And for those of you who are joining us in our resources tab, we have made that advisory accessible if you've not had a moment to look at it. But from your clinical experience and opinion, Dr. Arbig, is the mental health and well-being of parents in crisis? From the work that you do at R3 Continuum and from what you've seen in conversations in your clinical world, what are you seeing out there? Are they in crisis?
Yeah, and you'll notice I misspoke when I said the Surgeon General's advisory and I said Surgeon General's warning. Those are probably two different things, but maybe I misspoke on purpose. This is I don't know if I would say we're at a crisis point with parental mental health, but it's certainly noteworthy that this was an important enough topic that the government put out a paper on it, right? So this is stuff that we've all felt and experienced, and I think we are seeing really added pressures for parents, and that's starting to show up for folks. Being a parent now versus being a parent 30 or 40 years ago is a much different proposition in many ways. And I know we'll dig into some of that today. But yeah, parents are really struggling right now. And I think, some of it's easy for us to see why, some of it maybe isn't so obvious for us.
Yeah, I know. I myself am a working parent and an executive here at R3, and I've got 2 wonderful children who are middle schoolers. And I know I feel the stress in their day to day. You're navigating, helping them with their own mental health and emotional well-being. And so I can totally attest that. Now I don't feel like that I particularly are in crisis, but can definitely see where that advisory is spot on in terms of what people are experiencing. So
Well,
yeah, go
and
ahead.
and and I've worked with Jamie for a long time. If you know R3 and you know our organization, we've talked about this. We're both working parents, and have different challenges, and it does show up in the
Mhm.
workplace, right? It shows up in our relationship, in the things that we're working on. And in some ways that's helpful because it informs some of how we think about what we're doing in our field, in our industry, in the employers and the employees and the other individuals that we serve. So I appreciate the fact that you're a parent and that sometimes I get to see part of what it's like for you to be a parent. You probably get to see the same, and that's actually helpful for us. So.
Absolutely. So my next question really is diving into some of the concerns that are flagged within the advisory. So what were some of the key learnings from this advisory that workplaces and working parents themselves should take note of?
Uh, there's a fair amount of them, and it's a pretty easy read. So I'd really encourage everyone to download that or to grab that and to look at it. But a couple of the key things, that's referenced in this that I want to highlight. One is time demands. So we're seeing an interesting phenomenon where people are spending more time at work, right? But it also takes more hours in a given week to do the things we need to do to parent, right? And depending on how old the kids are, I know that we've joked about running from one sport to the next sport or having this meeting or that meeting. And when I was a kid, I don't remember my parents being that frantic about stuff. It just seems it's busier being a parent. And what that means is there's less hours in the day, right? There's less hours in the day for parents. And so maybe the things that they would otherwise be doing in that time, whether it's unwinding, having a glass of wine with your spouse at the end of the day and talking about your day, doing other things that you would want to do for yourself for self-care, that just gets pushed off. It gets pushed off because guess what? I need to prioritize my kids. That's my number one priority. I can't let work go. That's my second priority, or sometimes my first, depending on that. But depending on the day, those things might flip. But just the time demands in of themselves are pretty darn significant. Um, the other thing, a couple other things that really stood out. People are really thinking about, is my kid okay? Are they safe? Right. And um, school shootings are something that always come to mind for me with this, because it's something that we worry about, even though it's a relatively low base rate event, right? It's not likely to happen to my son in his school. Statistically, it's not likely to happen, but I'm still worried about that kind of stuff. I'm worried about, you know, bullying on social media. I'm worried about, are they doing the right things or the wrong things? Or are they devoting enough time to school? Or are they getting sucked into, other things? So just the amount of worry that's on a parent's plate. And then you take that worry about your kid, and then you combine it with, I'm worried about my finances. I'm worried about, are we going to have enough to make ends meet? Kids are expensive these days, right? Especially if they're in certain sports. So there's more pressure, I think, that way from a financial standpoint. And the other thing that maybe is more unique to some of us and not others, but I'm seeing more of it, is being worried about multiple generations of my family, right? So I might have kids growing up and I might have aging parents. It's just a whole lot on the plate. Um, and then, we're talking a lot here about parents' mental health, but I'm also worried about my kids' mental health. Are they struggling with anxiety and depression? Am I seeing that? I think we're more mindful of that now, coming out of the past several years, coming out of the pandemic, where we did see that. We saw a lot of anxiety, we saw a lot of depression. We may have seen increases in suicidal thoughts or behaviors in our kids, which is alarming to many of us. And so I think a lot of us parents feel like it just doesn't stop, right? The demands and the things to worry about and the things to be focused on, the noise never stops.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. And all the points you hit on are things I'm like, yep, totally can see that across my friend groups and the school community and even at work with other parents that in the working environment. So looking at across the board at working parents, even just in general employees too, not even employees that have that maybe don't have children, everyone's carrying different stressors through life. I
Mhm.
always kind of said that during COVID, I said the same thing. It's like, yeah, we all have things that are happening. They're just different things that are happening and different things that are stressing us out and different things that we're worrying about. But looking at parents today, and I'm thinking like our generational parents, what is causing parents to be more stressed out now versus in previous generations? So, like, I know growing up, my parents didn't have to worry about me having my cell phone and social media and all the stressors that went with that. But we were also out, almost like latchkey kids in a way, where we're out till the sun goes down and they're not able to identify where we're at. So it's a different level of stress. Can you talk a little bit on some of those? I know that you kind of mentioned some of the sports and some of the other things, but are there specific things from a generational difference that parents are navigating now that could be creating more stressors than what maybe our parents in their generation experienced?
Yeah, as you were talking, Jamie, I was thinking about when I was 16, my parents let me drive halfway across the country to go see friends. And most of that way, I probably didn't have cell phone coverage, and my car could have broken down, and anything could have happened. And they didn't really think twice about that, which might have spoken to how much they cared about me as a child. But that being what it is, um, it's a whole different landscape. There's nothing from your childhood and my childhood, and we're not that old, by the way,
No.
um, that is very similar to what it means to be a kid today. Um, it's not uncommon, to see a group of kids sitting at a table and none of them are talking to each other. They're all staring at their phone like this. Um, there is an I'd go so far as to say an addiction in many kids to social media, to their cell phones, to their text messaging. Um, that's we understand that because I think we use it, but not in the same way that they use it, right? And when I was a kid, if there was a bully or someone in school, it was obvious to people and to people in school or to your parents or to whatever. Now that bully could be anyone, anywhere in the world, right? It's not necessarily, the kid in your grade or the kid in your class or whatever it is. Um, so there's just, I think that in itself, I mean, you could spend all afternoon talking about that topic. Um, and I think that was even has even been more entrenched as we have kids that grew up, a good portion of their life was during the pandemic when social contact was you know was not appropriate, right? Or not done. So um they might have had a disinclination to engage in person socially with people to begin with, and now their schooling and their friend groups and their social situation is entirely in front of a computer or a phone. um Yeah, I think there's a sense among parents, of feeling a little bit alone. Um, Whereas, a lot of the things that your kids might do might involve socialization for the parents, right? You're going to a game or you're going to this or you're going to that. And so the kids are getting that social interaction, and so are the parents. So I can commiserate with Jamie about a problem that I might be facing or a situation. And now, if I'm devoting all my time to working or to doing things at home or whatever it is, maybe I just don't have those social connections as a parent as much as parents, 20, 30 years ago might have had.
Yeah. I can attest that those social interactions are so important. And think almost just to validate that you're not wrong in some of your parenting approaches or what your kid might be navigating is not abnormal. Like, because to your point, I mean, yes, we've got plethora of information we can access on Google. We can certainly talk with a clinician if we need to. But I think there's something to be said when you're in your community of parents, in the school system or in the sports arena where you're seeing what you're navigating is normal. I think that can help to kind of make you feel a lot more calm and a little bit more, less concerned in some ways too. I know that when my kids got into school and you were able to interact with more families, there definitely was that change and like, oh, okay, all right, I got this.
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
so the advisory had some interesting stats in it that I wanted to call out because it was a little shocking in some regards, but 41% of respondents feel so stressed in their daily lives they can barely function, and 48% say their stress is completely overwhelming on most days. But stress is not always caused by mental health or well-being struggles. So can we talk a little bit about what are, I know we've kind of mentioned some stressors, but like, can we dive a little bit into those statistics and kind of some of the concerns around that and kind of elaborate a little bit on what might be kind of creating, I mean, I feel like those numbers are pretty high for people who aren't able to function and feeling super overwhelmed. Like I could see why they called this out as definitely a concern for our country.
yeah. And it's important, like you mentioned, it's important for us to differentiate stress from, what we'd consider to be like diagnosable mental health conditions. stress is an emotional state, is a feeling. Um, it's not pathological in itself, but it's something that we often talk about, feeling stressed or being stressed. And when you're looking at data that suggests that half of parents out there are feeling stressed enough to impact their functioning, that's a pretty alarming statistic. That means that almost, uh, 1 in 2 of us is just making it. I mean, that's what we're doing, and we're feeling that stress, and that stress in itself has negative consequences. That's going to lead to feelings of burnout. That's going to lead to difficulty sleeping. That's going to lead to, um, negative interactions with people in your life, whether that be your kids or your spouse or people in your workplace, right? And for some, that can lead to, getting into some negative coping mechanisms, things that we generally try and avoid, increased alcohol use or increases in other behaviors that just aren't healthy things for us to be doing. So, um, you know, it's that, and that is different from just saying, I had a stressful day, right? We've all had stressful days, and we've all had days where at the end of it, we're like, geez, I hope I don't have to go, do that again tomorrow. Um, and we're talking about a large percentage of people that's their constant state of being. And that's a really scary statistic for me.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So looking at work-life balance, I mean, there's been a focus on work-life balance within organizations for a while now.
Hmm.
Uh, I was trying to think too, is there like a date and time where that started to become a very prominent term and a priority focus for workplaces? But I couldn't really kind of grasp, like I couldn't find like a date, a specific time frame of that. But with more and more workplaces that are looking at that, certainly post COVID, so much increase in well-being support and solutions that employees can tap into and utilize. How is stress levels not reduced? So, we've got all these resources, we have resources we can leverage personally. There's certainly a lot of apps out there. Why are we still seeing such increased stress levels to the point where 48% of people that took that survey are feeling so overwhelmed?
Good question. And I have a bit of a bias here and I'll expose it. I don't like the term work-life balance. I think it's become a a fluff term that doesn't mean much, and every organization says they want it, right? Because it sounds good. Um, but I think the reason I don't like it is the same reason that 48% of people say they're still stressed. It doesn't mean anything all by itself. Um, what work-life balance means for me and what it means for Jamie and what it means for other folks, it's going to be different. And you need to look into that and you go, what are you really trying to accomplish? If you are a high flying, high functioning executive, this idea that you're going to leave the work site at every day at 4:30 is not going to fly, right? Um, this idea that you're going to be at every one of your kids' everything is probably not realistic, but that doesn't mean that you need to be unhappy or stressed. It means you need to think through what are ways that I can feel fulfilled in my career and still feel connected and fulfilled at home. So when we see that statistic being what it is, um, in my mind, and this is somewhat conjecture, but it's paying lip service to the idea, but people not really digging in to do the work. And that could be on part of individual employees. It could be on part of employers themselves and things that they're doing or not doing that they could be doing. So it it is kind of alarming that we're seeing a proliferation of supposed things to aid in work-life balance, and undoubtedly some of those things are helpful. I'm not saying that they're not by any stretch, but we haven't really hit the sweet spot of how to do it.
Interesting. It's almost like similar to like I want to lose weight, but I don't want to work out or
Sure.
I don't want to eat right. I still want to have my, pizza and, which you can still eat pizza and lose weight, but it just depends on how you approach it. But so you have to almost be intentional about how you're balancing that. And it really has to be the employee kind of focusing some energy on that, but also having a workplace that supports potentially how they want to do that.
And being very realistic about what that means for you. You know, it's not even within your organization or your work group or your team,
Yeah.
it's not going to be the same. You're going to have some people that have a higher tolerance for grinding it out at work and still feeling like they're making it at home. You're going to have some people that if they did that same thing, they'd feel really unfulfilled at
Yeah.
home and as a parent. So it's not a one size fits all. And it really does involve a little bit of work and effort to hit that balance point. Um, One of the things, Jamie, and I don't have this exact statistic pulled up in front of me, but um, Gen Zers think, belonging is an essential part of them fitting into a workplace culture, you know, which is not necessarily what it was for my generation or for older generations. It's, I want a paycheck, I need security, I need benefits. The younger generation is belonging, right? So how do you balance out that sense of needing to belong, but needing to be a professional and needing to take care of my family? It's not an easy equation. It's not a simple, we're just going to implement this policy thing. It really involves some strategic work on how do you get your employees to feel that, because in order to have an organization that's functioning effectively and employees that are pushing in the ways that you need them to push to be successful as a business, they also need to feel like they're cared for in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. So diving in a little bit on the child mental health side of it, there was mention correlation between the parent's mental health and the child's mental health. And I found it interesting and concerning at the same time, but you can really see it if you're, when you know somebody who maybe is struggling and you can kind of see some reflection of that within their child. So can you speak to how this trickles down and the
Sure.
impact overall from parents not addressing their own mental well-being and how that could, have some substantial impacts on their children?
Yeah. Um, and there's a couple different pieces on this. The first thing I'll mention is we know there's a genetic load um, for some mental health conditions, meaning if my parent has it, I'm more likely to be susceptible to it. We know that's true for like major depression, for example. If I come from a long line of people with major depression, I'm more likely myself to experience that. It's not a given, but it's what we know so far. So there is some element of, from a biological standpoint, I may be more predisposed as your child if you struggle with something. But the more relevant or important thing here is probably um, kids learn from their parents, right? We know this, right? I, as a parent, try and model the behavior I want my child to exhibit. Um, and if I'm incredibly anxious and indecisive, and this is the environment that my child is around when they're home, guess what? That child is likely to adopt some of those things, not consciously, obviously, but subconsciously. They may struggle if I'm depressed and downtrodden and have low self-esteem. That's what the child is coming away with. Which, by the way, I'm not suggesting in any stretch that struggling with those things is bad for your children, because we do struggle with those things. A lot of us do. Um, but it's how do I model appropriate help seeking behavior, right? It's not about um, not having struggles. It's about how do I model the behavior of when I have a struggle, like here's what I do to get help so that that's part of how they think about it themselves.
So interesting. And talking kids, I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, with the school environments now, the school violence, not just talking like the shootings,
Mhm.
but like the violence within the schools. And from what from being on the PTO board, because I'm one of those moms that likes to be very involved with what's going on outside of school, or what's going on in the school, but also their other activities. Um, you know, and I've heard it from other schools within the Minneapolis, Minnesota kind of area, just the violence uptick, and a lot of it driven by social media. So a lot of it's, outside forces bringing kind of impact into the schools. And I know the schools have focused really hard on that. And I can already see a major difference, which is really, really exciting and kind of promising to see. But also educational standards, and like the stress of like, the impact of COVID and how some kids are behind, how is that helping mental health levels within not just like in the home setting, and then you've got the caregiver on top of that. Like if you've got, aging parents, I know I'm kind of bucketing them in together. I kind of want to meld those two questions that we originally had that were separate. If a parent's got that and they're kind of getting hit from two different angles at home, and then they've got work going on, and let's say something's going on at work, you might even have like a trifecta of some sort where you're getting hit in so many different directions. Can you talk a little bit to that and how that can be really impactful?
Yeah. Um, in to the first part of your question, I think, going to school is a whole different experience than it even used to be. Um, and I'm amazed, and this isn't a commentary on schools by any stretch, but I'm amazed at the kind of things that I would have gotten in trouble for when I'm a kid that is the norm now.
Yeah.
Um, so it is a very different environment, and it's they can only address and handle so many different things as teachers and administration. So I think there is an element of that parents are maybe dealing with more of that as well, because they're trying to do some things that maybe back 20 years ago the schools would have been on top of, but they're not anymore. Um, in terms of the varying stressors, it might just be the age I am now, but I have a lot of friends and people in my life that are struggling with what Jamie just said, which is I have an aging parent at the same time as I have kids. So, um, I'm struggling with getting my mom or my dad into some kind of assisted living for memory care, and my kid at school is struggling, and I have meetings with this group and meetings with that group. And, so when you have aging parents, you go from, parents take care of their kids, and then at some point that tips back over to um, kids taking care of their parents, right? When you get to a certain tipping point in age. Um, and there's just not a lot of time left at the end of the day for you. Like you're in the middle of that. You
There.
spend all day trying to help solve other people's problems, and you're not thinking about what do I need. And by the way, this translates perfectly. Um, or I shouldn't say that, but this also applies in the work setting. If you are in a management role or a leadership role,
Mm-hmm.
um, that's just another layer of challenges. But you spent all of your day going, are my people okay? Am I doing everything for them? And you're not really taking a moment to say, am I okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. I'm glad you touched on how that kind of converts into the workplace and the stressors that can be from there. And obviously, if you're not showing up to work your best self because of everything you've got going outside of work, you're likely not showing up outside of work your best self either. And eventually that starts to impact productivity, starts to impact performance, really on kind of both fronts, which can be, I would imagine, I'm just curious from your clinical expertise, I could see that exasperating whatever mental health challenges you might be navigating. If you're really not showing up your best self, it might continue to compound on itself.
Yeah, it will. I mean, and we can't discount the the impact that workplace stressors have. I mean, we spend more time at work than we spend doing almost anything else in our lives. For most of us, this is a critical part of who we are as people. I'm not just here doing my job. I feel like there's a mission here. I'm part of that. Um, and so you can't discount those stressors and how they can impact you at home or vice versa.
Mm.
Um, it's just you can't compartmentalize that way. Some jobs or occupations you have to compartmentalize to some extent. We all do to some extent, but the reality is, as emotional beings, as humans, that's just not how we function.
Yeah, so interesting. So now, wanted to spend the first part of this webinar really kind of diving into what the causes of the stressors are, kind of looking at the advisory itself. What are the things that they're calling out? Now I want to shift over to what I'm sure a lot of our audience is here for, which are those strategies of how a workplace can make a difference and what can they put into place that kind of helps to build on that resilient workforce. So the advisory shares things that workplaces and communities can do to support working parents. So they had their own kind of thoughts, and I kind of pulled those out, but I wanted to put our R3 spin on them for this audience in terms of from our expertise, from our perspective, the four strategies that we feel HR teams can implement that aid in supporting working parents' mental health and well-being, and also to kind of share, some things that we've seen work within organizations. So I kind of want to go that direction now and dive into the first kind of area, like the first strategy, if you will. And you and I were talking about this before,
Mhm.
but that first being the organization needing to make changes at the policy level. Can you dive into that a little bit and elaborate for our group? How would they approach that? What policies do they need to be looking at? And what do you mean by the policy level and making changes and kind of elaborate?
Yeah, absolutely. And when Jamie and I were talking about this, we actually spent a good deal of time on this point. Um, it goes beyond what's in your HR manual, right? When we're talking about policy changes, it's not just what your lawyers are saying or what your HR is saying. It really is making changes in how your business functions in relation to certain groups of people. Now, um, it's common for employers to have certain carve outs for certain groups of people in your organization. We have anti discrimination policies. We may have policies related to, the language is spoken in the workplace. We may have policies, related to certain types of leave in certain situations. Um, we don't often think of parents as when we think about protected classes in workplaces, and I'm not talking legally, but we know we have protections for LGBTQIA folks in the workplace. We know we have protections for those that might have disabilities in the workplace. Um, we do things, we have things in our company policy related to those groups of people to ensure that they feel safe and protected in the workplace. We don't often think of parents as a separate group of people. And I'm not suggesting, by the way, that parents should be um, brought in that same way, but I am suggesting that you intentionally think through what are we doing for the parents in this organization? What are we doing for the people that we know may be struggling with competing priorities, that we know may be struggling with increased stressors, that we know are occasionally missing out on something for their family, for the workplace, or maybe are occasionally missing out on something in the workplace because they need to be with their families.
Mhm.
Um, do you have policies that are friendly toward parents, right? Do I have some policies in place? Um, for example, and this was called out in the Surgeon General advisory. Um, and I like that it was because I don't hear a lot of conversation. We hear a lot of conversation about working moms. We don't hear a lot of conversation about working dads, right? We all know what our maternity policies are for pregnant women, but do you have something in place for working dads? Because I don't know about you, in a lot of my circles, I mean, dads are taking on roles that were historically considered to be more mom's role. There's some role reversal in terms of what was traditionally this, is now that, or non-traditional family structures, right? But do you have policies or things in place so that anyone who's a parent would feel like, you know what, I can work here and still be a parent and still do all the things that I need to do? And those policies don't need to be overly burdensome or cumbersome for you as an employer, but they just show, you know what, I kind of thought through this issue a little bit.
Mhm. Yeah, thinking of another group of individuals that might be working for you and how you can
Yep.
easily add just a little bit more of that support for their circumstance. Yeah. So the advisory shares that workplaces should consider training that focuses on stress management and work-life harmony. So I know R3, who works with a lot of workplaces, we get called in, we've been called in for stress management type training, but we have, can you share a little bit about our kind of take on what we feel with training and how it can be impactful, but also, the learnings from it can be kind of absorbed and truly kind of taken action or put into motion in the workplace. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. In the many years that I've been with this company and working in this organization, we've seen a lot of requests for training. Um, and what I've seen over the years, and I think a lot of us have experienced over the years, is those trainings, if it's a traditional didactic, I'm going to sit here for an hour and listen to you talk, they don't really accomplish what we want them to accomplish. Um, because I'm not engaged in the process. I'm a passive observer in the process. And so I never probably walk away from a training internalizing that stuff. Now, why does that matter? It matters because if I'm really offering that resource to be a benefit for my people, I don't want to give them something that's not going to be legitimately helpful. Now, it may be helpful, but we have found other ways of approaching topics to be more useful in terms of people internalizing and engaging. Um, something that's group focused, something that's engaging. It's a back and forth dialogue, right? I'm going to come in and maybe I'm the expert, and we're going to talk about some stuff, but then we're going to do it, and maybe we pause and then we come back after a couple of weeks and revisit how did that go, right? It becomes more of a habit that way. It's not just you talk to me and then you went away. It's, I'm going to engage with you, on an individual level, and I'm not saying one-on-one individual necessarily, but maybe it's a group of 20 folks, maybe it's a group of 50 folks, but we are going to get in the same room and work on something together. Um, so that's more useful in terms of me internalizing the information. It's also more useful in terms of if I'm an employee feeling like you actually care about this topic. Because guess what? If I went on Google right now, and I won't, and said, find me a training for um, sexual harassment, I could probably come up with thousands of trainings that are out there. And I could easily select one of those and say, everyone in this organization is going to watch this 1 hour training. But it's a check the box thing for the employer. It's doing something to say I did it versus doing something to where I really want someone to understand and to feel and to gain quantifiable skills that they can use in their workplace and outside of the workplace. So we have just, um, really moved away from, the traditional training and moved more toward, that interactive work group um, style because the material is just much better received that way.
Yeah. And then they're almost working on it collectively. So it gives them conversational, they can talk with each other outside of the workshop, on what they learned. And then when
Mhm.
you come back to that action group, you're able to say, yeah, this is how I implemented that. And here's the result I got from it, which helps to share with others who maybe were slow to the adoption of it, that it can
Mhm.
be done and that there's impact with that, which is great.
Yeah, we learn from repetition, we learn from
Mhm.
practice.
Yeah.
And so, Jamie and I are in this group and it's about, let's say it's effective communication with colleagues, right? And so we talk about some strategies for that. Um, and we come back a week later and I'm like, yeah, I tried this and it really failed, and here's what happened, and it went sideways.
Mhm.
It also gives you, okay, what's a different way to think about it? What's a different way to approach it? So it's it's kind of real time trial and error with experts, um, and that's where you're going to get that real definable difference in whatever that topic or that content happens to be.
Great. The advisory also recommends employers to provide access to comprehensive and affordable, high quality mental health care, with most employers offering EAP support for employees. Is that comprehensive enough? Is it meeting all of the needs that working parents might need today in taking care of their mental health and their well-being? Or is there more that they could be looking at? And I know we've talked with some employers where yes, most of their employees are getting that support, particularly if they're full time, but not always the part time employees getting that kind of support. So, can you share a little bit about some of the creative solutions we've been able to provide that help workplaces to give kind of that more on demand or accessible support, whether it's a clinician being put into a workplace that they can schedule time with right there within the work environment, or other ways that we have been able to help to support to make sure that all employees might have that access.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll start with, what they referenced in this document, which I think is a wonderful start. Employee assistance programs are good resources for lots of things, and including, providing that brief, support in a more generalized way. And they've been that, a good resource for that for some time. Um, we have started to incorporate other modalities of supporting people, realizing that sometimes there's a reluctance to reach out to an EAP to initiate services. Sometimes, um, maybe I want something that's a little bit more specialized or specific, or my needs are a little bit more specialized or specific. And in this conversation in particular, and where my brain goes on this, and this might not always be fair, but a lot of the parents that are working in your organization, just given their, likely ages and different things, they're, your leaders are likely to be parents, right? Which means almost by default, in many situations, your leaders are going to be struggling with a unique set of stressors. And so it's not that I want to create a duality of how I treat my people, but the truth of the matter is, I might want to have a more focused view on my leadership. Um, in fact, I would go so far as to say you definitely need a more focused view on your leadership, if for only because they are supporting people in your organization, and I would almost guarantee that they need support. Um, for any variety of reasons, but leaders in most organizations are good at being the care givers. They are not good at being the care receivers.
Mhm.
So, we've done several things in our organization and do several things in our organization to support employers' unique mental health needs. Like Jamie said, we put clinicians on the ground on site at a work site. We can do the same virtually. Again, knowing that ease of access. If you want people to access mental health care, you make it as easy as possible. Um, Meaning that if I can trip over the counselor, that's good, right? I'm likely to engage with them. If it's too hard, it's too many steps. Well, what did we talk about before? Parents are busy. They don't have enough time for anything. They're not going to take the time to call the back of the insurance card and figure out who they can go see within their network. Um, I mean, they may at times, but the reality is the easier you can make it, the better. We've also implemented a program that's largely geared toward your management level, your C-suite level folks who maybe want or need specialized counseling, but they don't want the other stuff that goes along with it, right? I want a very good provider who's a specialist in this, who can see me in a time that works for my schedule, and who is super easy to access, right? So I'm not dealing with um, you know, insurance forms and this and that and the other thing. And we've had good success with that. Um, in that it's kind of, I don't know how you want to put it, kind of a concierge. You could think of it as a concierge mental health service, right? It's We know how hard it can be to access traditional mental health care. There's a lack of providers, and there's wait lists. And if you call a clinic, if someone's available, you're going to take whoever's available there who has openings as soon as possible versus I really want to see Sally. She's the best person here. Well, you might be waiting 6 months to see her. So we've tried to remove some of those barriers to make it easier to access and also to provide the right support at the right time. So that particularly, and again, we're talking about parents here, particularly those parents that they don't have much time, but they can carve out that little bit of time for themselves, and it's well used time.
Yeah. And with them, those leaders in those high test, high stress roles, when they've made that decision that they're going to call for somebody, keeping it accessible and easy for them to get that support, it's going to help keep them engaged to make sure they get the support. So love that we have that offering and ability for leaders. And I think that's a great strategy for workplaces, because if your leaders are healthy, your workplace inevitably is going to be more healthy. Kind of piggybacking on that or
And
continuing. Oh, go ahead.
can I just jump on that for a second,
Yeah,
Jamie?
absolutely.
The inverse of that is also true. If your leaders are not healthy, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to maintain a healthy organization.
Mm.
Um, the health of an organization is not always, but largely driven by from the top down. If you have a leadership group that is demonstrating, you know, the things that you want in your organization, greater odds that your lower level employees are. If you have leaders who are struggling openly, guess what? It's going to be really hard for others to not struggle. So, I mean, I like that you brought up that point. I'm sorry I jumped off and brought it up again, but I think that's a critical one
Mm-hmm.
of the health of your organization. We're talking about individuals, we're talking about people, right? uh Jamie, Tyler, but really it's more than that. It's how does this person show up and do what I need them to do, and it has much larger consequences than any one particular person.
Absolutely. And something that the advisory did not cover, that's a strategy that we have been recommending to workplaces, and it goes alongside kind of that leader mental wellness counseling, is supporting your people in high test, high stress roles with performance coaching. Excuse me. A lot of times, you know, a leader is in that role because they're like career driven, they want to succeed, they probably have been very successful, which has moved them to that level and into that role. So their performance can actually be impactful in their mental well-being as well. And, if you're a parent and you're trying to perform well, and maybe you've got a barrier that's keeping you from being like an effectively being able to talk to your team or communicate. Or let's say you've just transitioned to that leader role and now you're trying to figure out that balance between home and this new role, and it's a lot more stressful than you think. Sometimes that can be challenging. So from your clinical experience, from some of the things that I've mentioned in terms of what we've seen performance coaching being really successful in helping, can you talk a little bit about how that can help kind of those working parents in roles where um, their performance is important to them, and that can even drive to some of the disbalance, the unbalance that you're seeing with parents because they're trying so hard to be successful probably everywhere.
Yeah, and what you see with people at a certain level is they hit a point where they're trying harder, but they're not getting the results, right? Like I'm gonna push harder, but I'm not getting the results I wanted. And performance coaching is really not about how do I solve Jamie's problem so much as how do I help Jamie get to that next level, right? How do I take someone who's very successful and optimize what they are doing? And um, it could be small tips and strategies. It could be ways to get them to think about problems or solutions differently, improving their executive presence in the workplace, improving their ability to communicate with their people. Um, but there's a nexus to from that to what we're talking about in terms of home life, right? If I am doing my job more effectively, I'm likely to be a better, those skills. We talked about this before. We don't live in silos, right? I can't compartmentalize everything. Well, guess what? The skills that help me solve problems at work are probably also going to help me solve problems at home
Yeah.
and vice versa. So, the performance coaching is, and many industries have used performance coaches for eons. Professional sports, professional athletes, Olympic athletes, and they swear by it because it helps them to be better at what they do. And those same principles and those same things apply to anyone in an organization who's simply trying to elevate their game. Um, in particular, for folks that are dealing with increased stressors and different things, it's not about, again, it's not about solving a problem. It's not about diagnosing a condition. It's really, how do I help you to do it better?
Mhm.
Which is super helpful in a lot of situations. And
Yeah.
we've seen clear results on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So now as we're kind of coming to the end of a year, 2024 is coming to a close in a few weeks, and we've got the start of the new year with 2025. As employers are kind of moving into this next year, I'm sure budgeting has already happened at a number of them, but as they're kind of looking at this new year and looking at how they might, you know, enhance benefits or, add support solutions for their employees, what is one piece of advice, or maybe multiple pieces of advice, that you want to leave them with that it could help them in being really effective in supporting working parents with their mental health and well-being?
Um, I think the biggest piece of advice is spend some time thinking about what is one concrete thing I can do that will assist working parents in my organization. Um, you know, make it something meaningful, make it something that people will notice the difference on. Um, I know as we're talking about budgets and spending, and a lot of organizations, might be pulling back or struggling in certain respects. And, we talked, Jamie, about, some of the, concierge level mental health support that we've offered, the performance coaching. Those things do cost dollars, but, it's not just dollars out the door for you as the employer. It really is and you know this, we all know this, right? If you have someone who's talented, it's really important for me to keep them and to keep them at doing the highest level work possible. And occasionally that might mean investing some dollars into helping that individual. We know that hiring can be an incredibly painstaking process, both in terms of time and dollars. And, so in a lot of organizations, and I'm just going to pick on Jamie because I'm looking at Jamie. If I lost Jamie today, how long would it take me to get another Jamie on board? Well, guess what? Jamie's been here for years. And even if I could find someone who had her skill set, they wouldn't have her knowledge and her institutional knowledge. So it's just, when you're thinking about that, and I know dollars and cents matter to every organization, including ours, but think through, where can we allocate some dollars that maybe we weren't planning to
Mhm.
ensure that the people that we have that are helping this organization move forward stay there. Because one thing that we are seeing is if an organization does not meet my needs as an individual, as a family member, and that goes on long enough, I'm going to have to make a decision, right? And that decision may be I'm going to go find a different job.
Yeah.
And we don't, especially now when talent is sometimes hard to come by. It's how do I invest in my talent a little bit to make sure that A, they stay, B, that they're moving forward, and C, that they're happy. I mean, and I think all of what we're talking about here relates back to that to some extent.
Yeah. Those are all great points. So we're going to open it up for Q&A. See if any of our audience has any questions that they would like to have you answer. As we wait for some of those to come in, I just want to flag for everybody down in the resource widget, there are a number of resources that are available to you. Again, we put the advisory in there, so if you hadn't had a chance to review it, you can download it and review it from there. We also put some of our recent additional content pieces. So I know there was a blog that we wrote on this topic. There are also some other articles that we were part of that we wanted to share with you all. And there's also a link to look at our solutions. We did talk about a number of kind of some of these strategies that we've helped workplaces with supporting their leaders in those high test, high stress roles with leader mental wellness counseling and leader performance coaching. Keep in mind, those could be for middle management too, which I know is an area that is definitely seeing a lot more burnout due to having so much more put on their plate, particularly when you have reductions in force and things of that nature. We also talked a little bit about our workshops and action groups. Those are kind of our alternative approach to training so that it becomes a more effective, more group activity. Um, and as Tyler kind of mentioned, we found are more effective in helping to make sure that investment you're making into a training sticks and is getting utilized. And so we also spoke about counselors being on site, so we can create that structured approaches like that for you as well. So definitely reach out to us if you have more questions on any of those strategies. Even if you just want to chat with us from a consultative perspective, kind of discuss what you're experiencing or what you've got, we can certainly have those dialogue and conversations as well, with no obligation. Obviously, it's just for that opportunity to just have kind of some expert ear, if you will. So I'm not seeing any questions come in at this point. And we are at the top of the hour, so to be respectful of our attendees' time and your time, Dr. Arvik, thank you so much for joining us and for all that real insightful information from the advisory and kind of diving into working parents and mental well-being and the mental health of them. Um, really appreciate your time and your expertise today. Thank you for
Thanks,
joining us.
Jamie, and thanks everyone
Yeah.
who joined us. It was a lot of fun, and thanks for taking the time.
Yeah. And definitely thank you to all the attendees. We appreciate you. You should be receiving a copy of this post, the recording, and here if you have any questions and need any reach out. So, all right, with that, have a great rest of your day, everyone. We'll catch you on the next webinar.
Take care.